The smell of old paper and linseed oil used to calm me down. That was the thing nobody tells you about working in a forensic document lab. You stop noticing it after a while, and then one day you realize it's the only smell that makes you feel safe. I was at my bench at the Newberry Forensic Center in Boston when my supervisor walked in and told me I had a visitor. That was unusual. I don't get visitors at work. My mother calls my cell phone. My friends text. Nobody shows up at a building that requires 3 keycards and a retinal scan just to reach the front desk. I set down the ultraviolet lamp I'd been using to examine ink oxidation patterns on a disputed 1940s letter and pulled off my gloves. The man waiting in the lobby didn't look like he belonged anywhere near a forensic document lab. He was tall, built the way men get when physical strength is a professional requirement, rather than a hobby, and he was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Dark hair, early 40s, a jaw that looked like it had been deliberately chiseled. He was standing with his hands behind his back, looking at the framed samples of historical handwriting on the walls, the way people look at things they don't care about, but need something to do with their eyes. He turned when I came through the door. "Dr. Whitfield?" he said. "That's me." I didn't offer my hand. "You are?" "My name is Beckett," he said. "Not Mr. Anything, just Beckett. I need your help with something that requires a very specific set of skills. Your name was given to me by someone at the FBI. I almost laughed. The FBI recommends me for a lot of things. That doesn't mean I take all of them. This isn't FBI work." He said it plainly. No apology in it. "I need you to authenticate a document. A handwritten letter. It was written roughly 60 years ago, and it determines the legal ownership of a significant amount of real estate in this city. If it's genuine, my family keeps what's been theirs for 3 generations. If it's forged, and I believe it is, someone has been building a case against us for years." I studied him for a moment. "Who are you exactly?" He held my gaze. "The kind of man most people in this city know better than to say no to." That should have been the moment I walked back through the door and told my supervisor I had work to finish. Instead, I heard myself ask what the letter said. I've thought about that moment 100 times since. Why I didn't leave. I could tell you it was professional curiosity. That disputed documents are genuinely fascinating, and 60-year-old handwriting authentication is the kind of puzzle I live for. That would be true. But it wouldn't be the whole truth. The whole truth is that something about the way he said my family made me stay. Not the power in it, the weight. I agreed to look at the document. That was all I agreed to. He sent a car the next morning. Not a cab, not a rideshare, a black SUV with a driver named Hollis who did not make small talk and knew exactly where to go without asking me anything. We drove to the back bay, past the kind of brownstones that have been in the same families since the 1880s. And stopped in front of one that had a brass door knocker, shaped like a ship's anchor. Beckett met me himself at the door. Inside looked like the kind of house that had been furnished slowly over a century rather than purchased all at once. There were oil paintings on the walls, actual oil paintings, not prints, and the floors were dark, wide plank wood that creaked in specific places in a way that suggested the house had learned to carry the people who lived in it. It smelled like coffee, and faintly, like cigarette smoke from someone who'd quit a long time ago. He led me to a study on the 2nd floor. The document was already laid out on a glass-topped table under a lamp, protected by a mylar sleeve. I put on fresh gloves before touching it. It was a letter. Single page. Handwritten in fountain pen on bond paper. Dated March 1962. The penmanship was educated. Small, controlled, right-hand dominant. Slightly elevated baseline that suggested the writer was tense when they wrote it. The ink had oxidized in the way iron gall inks do over 60 years, browning toward the edges of each stroke. The paper had foxing consistent with age. "It looks right at first pass," I said. I was already thinking about the pressure patterns, the letter spacing. Something about the descenders on the lowercase g and y was bothering me. "Where did this come from?" It was allegedly found in the estate of a man named Gerald Crane. He died 4 months ago. His family's lawyers presented it as evidence in a property dispute against my family. According to the letter, my grandfather made a verbal agreement with Crane's grandfather in 1962 to sell him a warehouse district on the South Boston waterfront. The letter supposedly documents the terms. And you're saying your grandfather never made that agreement? My grandfather died in 1989. He can't say anything. Beckett's voice was flat, but I have every record he ever kept. He documented everything. There is no mention of Crane in any correspondence from that period. Not one word. I looked back at the letter. The descenders were definitely wrong. I need my equipment. I can't tell you anything conclusive from a visual inspection. I know. I'm asking you to come back with your equipment. I looked up at him. Mr. Beckett. Just Beckett. I have a lab. A real one. With chain of custody protocols. If this ever goes to court, the authentication has to be done properly, or it's worthless. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. More like he was recalibrating. That's not possible. Then I can't help you. He was quiet for a long moment. What if court is not where this ends up? I set the mylar sleeve down carefully. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. Dr. Whitfield. He said my name differently this time. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm asking you to tell me the truth about a document before I decide what to do with the truth. That's all. I believed him. I don't know why, but I did. I told him I'd come back on Thursday with portable spectroscopy equipment, and that he'd need to let me work alone, without anyone standing over my shoulder, and that I'd give him my honest assessment, regardless of what I found, even if it wasn't what he wanted to hear. He agreed to all of it without negotiating a single term. Thursday came, and then Friday. And then an entire week during which I analyzed that letter more carefully than I've analyzed almost anything in my professional life. The ink was wrong. Not obviously, not in a way that would register to the naked eye, or even to a basic examination, but wrong in a specific technical way that I knew how to see. The ironed content was too consistent. Genuine iron gall ink from the 1960s has natural variation in iron concentration, because it was made by hand, in batches, by individual manufacturers. This ink had been aged artificially, treated with something to simulate oxidation, while maintaining a uniformity that real age never produces. It was a sophisticated forgery. Someone had put serious time and money into it. I sat in Beckett's study on a Friday evening and told him this, while he stood by the window with his arms crossed. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. How long would it have taken you to find that if you weren't looking for it? He finally asked. If I were doing a standard authentication, I might have caught it. Might not have. The paper aging is very good. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Could you testify to this in court? Yes. It would hold up. He turned from the window. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked tired. Not physically tired, the other kind. The kind that comes from carrying something for a long time. The Crane family has been trying to take that waterfront property for 30 years. My grandfather refused to sell. My father refused. Now they've decided that if they can't buy it, they'll manufacture a reason it was never ours to keep. That's fraud, I said. That's a serious federal crime. Yes, he looked at me directly. And the man who forged that letter is still in Boston. Something in the way he said it made my stomach tighten. What are you going to do? Find out who he is? He paused. I'd like your help with that too. I should have said no. I had already done what I came to do. I had found him his answer, clean and documented and defensible. I could have walked out that door and sent my invoice and gone back to my lab and my life and my cat, Edgar, who was going to be furious about how much time I'd spent away from home this week. The forger left traces, I said. I hadn't meant to say it. It just came out. The technique they used. There's a particular process for artificial iron oxidation that leaves a chemical signature. If you can get me a sample from another disputed document, something from the same source, I might be able to confirm it's the same hand. He went very still. Do you have other documents? I asked. He crossed to the desk and opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were 3 more letters, all ostensibly from the 1950s and 60s, all relating to property transactions, all involving the Crane family. How long have you had these? I said. Long enough to know something was wrong. Not long enough to prove it. I took the folder. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went back to my lab. I processed the documents through the proper protocols, careful and methodical, building a chain of evidence that would survive scrutiny. Every morning I drove to the Newbury Center, and every evening I drove home and fed Edgar, and fell asleep on the couch, with my notes spread across the coffee table. Twice I found a black SUV parked across from my building. I told myself it was coincidence the first time. The second time, I called Beckett. "I know," he said. "It's mine." "Excuse me?" "Someone connected to the Crane family knows you've been examining the documents. I put someone on your building." The anger came fast. "You don't get to make that decision for me." "No," he agreed. "I don't. I should have told you. I'm telling you now." I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, and Edgar winding around my ankles, and I tried to figure out how to feel about a man who had made a unilateral decision to protect me, and then immediately admitted he'd overstepped. "Who is on the Crane side of this?" I said finally. "Who are we actually dealing with?" Gerald Crane had a son. His name is Aldous. A pause. "He is not someone who handles setbacks gracefully, and he knows my name." "Yes." I sat down at my kitchen table. Edgar jumped up beside me, and I put my hand on his back, feeling him purr. "Okay," I said. "Then I need to work faster." I found the forger's signature in the third letter. The artificial aging process left a specific chemical ghost in the paper fibers, a compound that isn't present in genuinely aged documents and wouldn't appear in any commercially available aging treatment on the market. It was proprietary. Someone had developed it specifically for this kind of work. That meant either a very sophisticated amateur or someone who did this professionally. I ran the compound signature through every database I had access to. Nothing came back. I called in a favor from a colleague at the Secret Service's Document Examination Unit, carefully enough that I didn't have to explain why I was asking. She didn't find it either. I was sitting at my bench at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, with a single line. "You should stop asking about the compound." I took a screenshot. I sat there for a minute. Then I texted Beckett. He called me back in 40 seconds. That was when I understood, with real clarity, that the man on the other end of the phone had been moving pieces on a board I couldn't fully see, and that some of those pieces were me. "There's someone in the document authentication world who works for money and not principle," he said. "A man who has done this kind of work for several clients over the last decade, always with enough distance to stay clean. I've been looking for him for 2 weeks. And I found him an hour ago. His name isn't important. What's important is that he's currently in a hotel in Cambridge, and he still has all of his working materials." "How did you find him?" A pause. "The same way I find most things." I didn't ask what that meant. "If you have him, you have your evidence. Not in a form that goes to court," he said. "Not yet. I need you to look at whatever he has, formally, with your protocols and your documentation." "Beckett." I said his name carefully. "If you're about to tell me that you're going to bring this man somewhere, and I'm going to go examine his materials, I need you to tell me right now how that's happening." "He's agreed to it," Beckett said. "Voluntarily. People don't voluntarily agree to things that implicate them. Some people make calculations about their options and decides that cooperation is more survivable than the alternative." I sat with that for a moment. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. He's in a hotel room eating room service. He's not happy, but he's unharmed." I want to hear him say that himself. Another pause, longer. Then there was a shuffle and a different voice came on, older, slightly nasal, with the careful diction of someone who'd spent their life being precise about language. "I'm fine," the voice said. "He's right that I made a calculation. I'd rather help you than help Aldous Crane any further. Do you have your working materials?" "Yes." "All of them?" "Yes. I'm going to need to examine everything. All of it. And I'm going to document it formally, and it may be used in a federal investigation." "I understand that." I looked at Edgar, who had followed me to the lab and was now sitting on a stool, looking supremely unconcerned about everything. "Okay," I said. "Give me the address." The hotel room smelled like Chinese takeout and chemical solvents. The forger, he told me his name was Desmond and that he'd been doing this work for 11 years. Had his materials laid out on the dresser and the desk, with the faintly compulsive organization of someone who cared about his craft, even when his craft was illegal. There were inks, papers, aging compounds, UV lamps, reference samples. I spent 4 hours in that room. I documented everything on camera, logged every item, collected samples with clean instruments. I tested his aging compound against the signature I'd found in the letters. It matched. Not approximately, exactly. By 2 in the morning, I had everything I needed. Beckett was in the hallway when I came out. He was leaning against the wall with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and he looked, for the first time since I'd met him, like an actual human being, rather than a very convincing approximation of one. "Is it enough?" he said. "It's enough to prove every one of those letters is a forgery. It's enough to prove they all came from the same source. Whether Desmond will testify to who commissioned him, he will." Beckett said it with certainty. I didn't question. He's already agreed to it. I leaned against the opposite wall. I was exhausted in the particular way that comes from 4 hours of intense precision work in bad lighting. What happens now? In the morning, I'm meeting with an attorney. By end of week, this goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office. He paused. Aldous Crane is going to spend a significant amount of time explaining himself to federal fritters prosecutors. And your waterfront property stays in my family. He said it quietly, not triumphant, just certain. My grandfather bought that land in 1958. He used to take me there when I was a kid. He'd show me the water and tell me that this city was built by people who understood that the things worth keeping require work to keep. I looked at him. That's a good thing to teach a kid. He was a good man. He met my eyes. A better man than people assumed, given his profession. I knew what his profession was. I had known since the second day I came to his house, and noticed the way people in the neighborhood stepped aside when his car passed, and the way his name landed in conversations, like a stone dropped in still water. I had not asked him about it directly. I had not asked him about it because I was not sure I wanted to know the specifics, and because, more importantly, I had decided that what he'd done with me was straightforward. He'd needed a specific skill. He'd found the person who had it. He'd been honest about what he needed and what he could offer, and when I pushed back, he listened. That's rarer than most people think. "I need to invoice you," I said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "Send it to Hollis. He handles my accounts." "All right." I picked up my bag. "For what it's worth, your grandfather sounds like he was right. The things worth keeping do require work." He held the door of the elevator for me, without being asked, the way people do when it's instinct and not performance. In the lobby, Hollis was already there, coat on, ready. "Is Edgar going to forgive you?" Beckett said, as I walked toward the door. I stopped. "You remember that? You mentioned him on the phone, the night of the compound text." He had remembered the name of my cat from a 2-second aside in a phone call 2 weeks ago. I filed that away and didn't say anything about it. "Edgar forgives everything," I said. "He's very evolved." The federal case against Aldous Crane was filed 6 weeks later. My documentation formed the core of the evidence package. I gave a deposition that lasted most of a day. The assistant U.S. attorney told me afterward that it was one of the cleanest forensic chains of evidence she'd seen in a property fraud case. Desmond pled guilty and cooperated fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. Aldous Crane hired 4 different attorneys and fired 3 of them before the case even reached the discovery phase. The waterfront property in South Boston stayed in Beckett's family. I went back to my lab. I went back to ink oxidation and disputed signatures, and the particular satisfaction of knowing the truth about a thing when everyone around you is arguing about it. Edgar resumed his position on my work stool. My coworker Philippa brought in homemade scones on Fridays, and the ventilation system still hummed in the same key it always had, and everything went back to the way it was before. Almost. 3 months after the hotel room in Cambridge, Beckett called me. Not Hollis, him. It was a Sunday morning, and I was doing nothing particular. Just reading, which was why I picked up. "There's a property auction next Saturday," he said. "The Folio Society is selling a collection of 19th century correspondence from the Adams family estate. I thought you might find it interesting." "You're asking me to an auction." "I'm asking you to an auction," he confirmed. I looked at Edgar, who was sitting in a square of sunlight on the floor, with his eyes half closed, performing the deep contentment of a creature who has never once had to examine ink oxidation at 2 in the morning. "What time?" I said. He told me, and I wrote it down. Edgar watched me do it with one golden eye, which in cat means I told you so. And also, you owe me an extra scoop of food for the 3 weeks you spent in someone else's house. And also something else that doesn't have a word in English. Something like go ahead, you've earned it. I think he was right.